Did you know that signs of dementia can appear decades before a diagnosis? While many assume it's just a normal part of aging, the reality is far more complex and hopeful. With early recognition and the right actions, it's possible to preserve clarity, connection, and quality of life for years. Hi, I'm Peter Brown, and this is the Elderly Paradox. Welcome to our series, Dead Sea Water Discussions, where we explore the vital issues facing adults over 60 and their families. Today's topic is one that affects more than 55 million people worldwide: dementia awareness, early signs, prevention, and hope. We'll be unpacking everything from subtle early symptoms to how lifestyle choices can make a real difference to the latest advances in treatment and prevention. Let's listen in.
We've all heard of memory loss as a sign of dementia, but what are some early, lesser-known warning signs that families tend to miss?
That's a great starting point. Most people equate dementia strictly with memory issues, but in reality, the brain starts signaling trouble much earlier and in more subtle ways. One of the first things I always encourage people to notice is how someone moves. Are their steps shorter? Do they drag their feet? Are they suddenly having trouble using utensils or zipping up their jacket?
That's fascinating, Martha. I've seen older relatives become a little more clumsy, but I assumed it was just joint stiffness or arthritis. How is that tied to brain health?
It's all about motor control. When certain parts of the brain responsible for movement begin to deteriorate, it affects coordination, balance, and fine motor skills. We've seen individuals who once moved gracefully suddenly become unsure on their feet. It's not arthritis, it's cognitive decline showing itself physically.
So the body speaks before the memory fades?
Precisely. Movement is just the beginning. Let's talk about sensory changes. Has someone started bumping into furniture they've lived with for years? Are they hesitant to climb stairs or extremely sensitive to sound? These aren't quirks, they're signals.
And hearing loss. I read somewhere it's linked to dementia.
You're spot on. Midlife hearing loss can increase dementia risk by up to 90%, according to several long-term studies. When you can't hear well, your brain has to work harder to decode sound, leaving fewer resources for memory and reasoning. It's like trying to write a report while your internet keeps disconnecting.
That's a powerful image. What about physical strength? Is that also connected?
Yes. One of the lesser-known signs is reduced grip strength. If someone struggles to open jars, carry grocery bags, or hold on to objects securely, it's more than just weakness. Studies have shown that low muscle mass and frailty correlate with brain atrophy. In fact, one longitudinal study found that weaker grip strength in midlife predicted cognitive decline 2 decades later.
So the decline isn't sudden. It builds silently over years.
Exactly. That's why early awareness is so powerful. And let's not forget sleep. Sleep disturbances, especially insomnia, frequent waking, or nightmares, can reflect changes in brain activity. Deep sleep is when our brains clear out waste, including beta amyloid, the protein linked to Alzheimer's. Poor sleep means buildup, inflammation, and a faster track to cognitive issues.
That's concerning. What about daytime behavior? Can people notice signs there too?
Certainly. One major red flag is emotional withdrawal. If someone who used to enjoy gardening, socializing, or going to the mosque or church suddenly loses interest, that apathy might be neurologically driven. It's not just a bad mood, it's the brain losing its spark.
And I guess families might just see it as depression or moodiness.
Exactly. But unlike clinical depression, this type of withdrawal often doesn't come with complaints of sadness. It's more a lack of interest or initiative. Combine that with language problems, forgetting words, struggling to name objects, or pausing in the middle of a thought, and you're looking at classic early-stage cognitive decline.
This is so eye-opening. Do you have any real-life cases that illustrate this?
Yes, many. One case that stays with me is of a retired teacher, Helen. Her daughter brought her in because Helen had stopped writing in her journal and often said she couldn't find the words. She also stopped cooking meals that were once her pride and joy. No big memory issues yet, but subtle changes in movement, interest, and language were all there. Her scans confirmed early Alzheimer's.
That's so powerful. So catching those signs early helped her get support faster.
Absolutely. She began therapy, got on medication, and joined a community group. Her quality of life improved because her family acted early. Early detection doesn't cure dementia, but it slows its progression and empowers people to live better, longer.
So what would you advise families watching this? What are the 6 early signs they should watch for?
Here they are. 1. Movement changes. Shorter steps, dragging feet, poor balance, or clumsiness with daily tools. 2. Sensory shifts. Bumping into furniture they've lived with for years. Are they hesitant to climb stairs or extremely sensitive to sound? 3. Muscle weakness. Difficulty opening jars, weaker grip, or less stamina. 4. Sleep disturbances. Insomnia, vivid dreams, daytime fatigue, or restless movements. 5. Emotional withdrawal, apathy, avoidance of social events, lack of initiative. And 6. Language struggles, frequent word-finding issues, pauses, or using vague terms. If 2 or more of these occur consistently, it's wise to consult a neurologist.
That's a practical checklist. I can imagine people at home already making mental notes.
And remember, we're not talking about diagnosing yourself or others. These are prompts for awareness. Early action can buy time, peace, and planning.
Martha, thank you. This first segment was both sobering and hopeful. It's amazing to think how many lives we can impact just by paying attention.
Thank you, Peter. And I want to emphasize there's always hope. Dementia isn't a sudden storm. It's a slow drift, and we have time to course correct if we see the signs.
Now that we've unpacked those early, often overlooked signs of dementia, let's move on to the more classic indicators, the ones that really start to disrupt daily life. Martha, what are the major signs people need to recognize?
Absolutely. These are the signs that typically prompt families to seek help. The most recognized one, of course, is memory loss, especially short-term memory. People may forget recent conversations or appointments, misplace items like keys or phones, and then accuse others of stealing them because they don't remember moving them themselves.
So when does it move from normal forgetfulness to a real concern?
That's a great question. Everyone forgets things now and then. But with dementia, the forgetting becomes frequent and disruptive. For example, someone might forget the same conversation they had just 10 minutes ago and repeat the same questions multiple times in a single hour. They may also forget the names of close family members or forget how to get to familiar places.
That sounds both frightening and frustrating for the person and their family.
It is, and it's often accompanied by a breakdown in communication. People with dementia may struggle to find the right words or substitute unusual ones. For example, they might say hand clock instead of watch, or simply that thing for everything. Eventually, this can make conversations confusing or frustrating.
So communication becomes a struggle, not just memory.
Exactly. Another common symptom is personality change. A previously calm, easygoing person might become irritable or paranoid. They may accuse loved ones of stealing or lying or become anxious or depressed without clear reason. It's heartbreaking to witness.
I've heard of people becoming suspicious or even hostile.
Yes, paranoia is very common in mid to late stage dementia. Someone might believe people are watching them or that their spouse is cheating, even when there's no reason to suspect it. These thoughts aren't rooted in reality. They're cognitive distortions caused by brain changes.
And this can tear families apart, right?
Unfortunately, yes. family dynamics can suffer. That's why support groups and counseling are crucial. It helps caregivers understand that it's the disease talking, not the person.
What about decision-making? I've heard that poor judgment is a big issue.
Absolutely. Dementia affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and judgment. People may make odd financial choices like giving money to scammers or buying hundreds of dollars in unneeded products. They may dress inappropriately for the weather or leave the stove on and forget about it.
And I assume that creates safety concerns at home.
Very much so. Many families only realize the severity when a loved one wanders off, falls, or becomes victim to fraud. That's why evaluating decision-making ability is essential in diagnosis.
Is time and place confusion another big marker?
Definitely. People may forget what day or year it is or get lost in familiar neighborhoods. They may suddenly believe they're living in a different decade, thinking they're still in their 20s or that deceased loved ones are still alive. That must be deeply disorienting.
It is for both the person and their caregivers. One woman I worked with, Joan, was convinced she was back in her childhood home and kept asking for her mother. It took a lot of patience and redirection to keep her calm. What other signs should families be looking for?
Repetition is a big one. People with dementia often ask the same question or tell the same story multiple times without realizing it. They're not being annoying, it's because the short-term memory loop is broken.
And I assume misplacing things gets worse too.
Yes, and it's not just misplacing, but putting items in completely inappropriate places, like the TV remote in the freezer or the toothbrush in a shoe. These kinds of errors reflect serious disruptions in logic and spatial awareness.
Are hallucinations common in all types of dementia?
Not all, but they're very common in Lewy body dementia and sometimes in later stages of Alzheimer's. People may see people who aren't there or hear voices. While it can be frightening, sometimes it's more benign. One man I worked with often saw his old dog and found it comforting.
That's a silver lining, I suppose, but also a clear signal that help is needed.
Yes. And incontinence is another late-stage symptom. When the brain loses the ability to control bladder and bowel function, it's often a cue for caregivers that more comprehensive support is needed.
That's difficult for families to manage on their own.
It is. That's when respite care, adult day centers, or even memory care facilities might become necessary. We also need to talk about problem-solving difficulties. Many people can no longer follow a recipe, balance a checkbook, or complete multi-step tasks like preparing a meal.
So everyday life becomes a challenge.
Exactly. Even something as simple as making tea becomes confusing. They may forget to boil the water or add the tea bag. The decline in executive functioning makes multitasking nearly impossible.
And is there a framework you use to explain these stages?
Yes, we often refer to the Global Deterioration Scale, which outlines 7 stages, from no cognitive decline to very severe decline. Recognizing what stage someone is in can guide both treatment and caregiving plans.
So let me try to summarize the classic signs based on what you've said. 1, memory loss, especially forgetting recent events and names. 2, communication difficulties, trouble finding words, using vague language. 3, personality change, irritability, anxiety, paranoia. 4, poor judgment, risky decisions, financial errors. 5, disorientation, confusion about time, place, and identity. 6, repetitive behavior, repeating questions of stories. 7, misplacing things in unusual or illogical places. 8, hallucinations, visual or auditory, especially in late stages. 9, incontinence, a loss of bodily control. 10, problem-solving difficulties, trouble managing daily tasks.
Perfectly said. If a loved one is showing several of these signs consistently, it's essential to get a professional evaluation. Don't chalk it up to old age.
This has been incredibly informative, Martha. Understanding the difference between normal aging and dementia is crucial.
Absolutely. Awareness can lead to timely care, better planning, and improved quality of life for everyone involved.
We've covered early warning signs and classic symptoms of dementia, and it's been eye-opening. But now, let's bring in something equally important: hope. Martha, is there anything we can do to reduce our risk of developing dementia?
Absolutely, Peter. And I love that we're ending on this note, because while dementia is a serious condition, it's not all doom and gloom. In fact, studies suggest that up to 40% of dementia cases worldwide could potentially be delayed or even prevented through lifestyle changes.
40%? That's huge. So what can we do right now to take control?
It starts with building what we call cognitive reserve. That means keeping your brain active and challenged throughout your life. Learn new skills, take up a language, play a musical instrument, or engage in strategy games like chess. Reading regularly, learning poetry, or even teaching others stimulates the brain and keeps neural pathways strong.
So the more we use our brain in diverse ways, the more resilient it becomes.
Exactly. Think of it as mental cross-training. Just like athletes work different muscle groups, our brains thrive when we push it to learn, adapt, and stay curious.
What about physical activity? Is that just for heart health?
Not at all. Physical activity is just as important for brain health. Exercise increases blood flow to the brain, supports neuron growth, and reduces inflammation. Aerobic exercise like walking briskly, swimming, or cycling for at least 30 minutes a day has been shown to slow cognitive decline.
And strength training?
Also important, lifting weights or doing body weight exercises helps with balance, reduces frailty, and even impacts hormonal and neurological functions tied to brain health.
So it's a full body approach.
Yes, and speaking of body and brain, diet plays a key role too. Diets like the Mediterranean and Mind diets are loaded with brain-supportive foods. We're talking leafy greens, nuts, berries, whole grains, fish, olive oil, and very limited red meat or processed sugar.
That's encouraging. You don't need a fancy supplement, just real food.
Exactly. And you also need to manage chronic conditions. High blood pressure, diabetes, and cholesterol issues are not just cardiovascular problems, they affect your brain too.
What's the connection?
Poor vascular health can damage blood vessels in the brain, leading to silent strokes or reduced oxygen flow. Over time, this starves brain tissue and increases the risk for vascular dementia.
And what about sleep? It seems like everyone is sleep deprived these days.
Unfortunately, yes. Sleep is where the brain does its house cleaning. During deep sleep, harmful proteins like beta amyloid, which are implicated in Alzheimer's, are flushed out. Without enough restorative sleep, toxins accumulate.
So sleep isn't a luxury, it's brain maintenance.
Perfectly said. Adults should aim for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep per night. And if you snore heavily or stop breathing during sleep, get evaluated for sleep apnea. Untreated apnea significantly increases dementia risk.
We often think of alcohol and smoking in relation to cancer or heart disease. Are they linked to dementia as well?
Very much so. Excessive alcohol can shrink brain tissue and impair neurotransmitter activity. Smoking damages blood vessels and reduces oxygen to the brain. Quitting smoking and limiting alcohol are two of the most brain-saving decisions you can make.
Social interaction, where does that fit in?
It's vital. Humans are wired for connection. Regular social engagement reduces stress, builds emotional resilience, and stimulates multiple brain regions. Isolation, on the other hand, is a known accelerator of cognitive decline.
So chatting with neighbors, attending community events, or volunteering could all help?
Absolutely. Even brief, meaningful interactions can have a huge impact. I always tell families, make space for shared activities, play cards, cook together, go on walks. It nourishes the soul and the brain.
Let's talk about new treatments. Any hope on the medical side?
There's promising news. Drugs like lecanemab and donanemab are designed to target amyloid plaques in early Alzheimer's cases. While they're not cures, clinical trials show they slow cognitive decline, especially when started early.
That's encouraging. Are there any other promising areas?
Yes, researchers are exploring gene therapy, anti-inflammatory treatments, gut-brain health connections, and even brain stimulation techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation. Combining these with lifestyle interventions might yield even better results in the future.
So the future isn't hopeless, it's evolving.
Exactly. And perhaps the most powerful tool we have right now is early detection. The earlier we identify symptoms, the sooner we can intervene. That's why awareness campaigns like this one are so important.
I'm so glad we've had this conversation, Martha. Before we close, could you share a story of someone who made meaningful changes and saw positive results?
Absolutely. I worked with a retired librarian named Doreen. In her early 60s, she started forgetting small details, nothing major, but enough to raise concern. She consulted a neurologist, got a formal diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, and immediately took action.
What did she do?
She revamped her diet, started walking with a group every morning, took up painting, and reconnected with her book club. 3 years later, her symptoms had barely progressed. She even volunteers now at a memory cafe, helping others.
That's inspiring.
It shows that a diagnosis doesn't have to be the end of a meaningful life. With awareness, action, and support, we can change the narrative.
Thank you, Martha. This has been one of the most hopeful conversations I've had on this topic.
Thank you, Peter. It's been an honor.
Today, we have explored dementia from all sides, the early whispers, the louder warnings, and the paths to prevention. What we've learned is that dementia isn't just something that happens. We have choices, we have tools, and we have hope. If you've noticed any symptoms discussed today in yourself or someone close to you, please don't wait. Consult a licensed healthcare provider or neurologist. Early evaluation could mean years of added clarity, independence, and connection. And remember, this episode is meant for education, not diagnosis. We're here to empower you with knowledge so you can take informed steps toward a better tomorrow. If this conversation helped you, type 1 in the comments. If you'd like us to improve or explore another topic, type 0. Subscribe and hit the bell for more thoughtful conversations from the Elderly Paradox. Together, we can turn awareness into action and make aging something to embrace, not fear. See you in the next video, and until then, take care of yourself. Thank you for listening.